Snow had been falling since morning, the soft kind that seemed to quiet the whole world and wrap even the poorest streets in a fragile kind of beauty. Christmas Eve always did that to the town of Ridgewood, made everything look gentler than it really was. For Daniel Harper, it was just another cold evening to survive. He stood on the wooden porch of the old farmhouse, his coat pulled tight, eyes fixed on the narrow road that disappeared into the white distance. Somewhere out there, a train had arrived an hour ago. Somewhere out there was the woman he had agreed, somewhat desperately, to marry. Daniel wasn't a man who believed in fairy tales. He believed in work, in responsibility, in getting up before dawn to tend animals and falling into bed exhausted at night. Since his wife had died 3 years earlier, life had stripped itself down to bare essentials. There was his 6-year-old son, Noah. There was the farm, barely holding on. And there was the loneliness he never spoke about, the kind that settled into your bones and stayed there. The idea of a mail-order bride had started as a practical solution. Neighbors whispered. Church friends suggested gently that a child needed a mother, that a farm needed a woman's touch, that a man shouldn't grow old alone. Daniel resisted for a long time. It felt transactional, cold. But when winter came early and Noah began asking why other children had mothers at school events, Daniel finally broke. He answered an advertisement, exchanged a handful of letters, sent a modest photograph of himself standing stiffly by the barn. Her name was Anna. Her letters were careful, almost formal, written in neat handwriting. She spoke of wanting a family, of working hard, of believing that kindness mattered more than wealth. She never complained, never asked for anything. Daniel had noticed what she didn't say as much as what she did. There was no mention of parents, no stories of a warm home, only a quiet hope for something better. Now, as the light faded and the cold deepened, Daniel wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. What kind of woman would agree to come to a stranger on Christmas Eve? What kind of man was he, waiting for her like this? The crunch of footsteps broke his thoughts. Down the road, a small figure appeared, struggling through the snow, dragging a battered suitcase behind her. She wore a thin coat, frayed at the cuffs, and a scarf that looked too light for the weather. As she came closer, Daniel saw that her boots were worn, one sole patched clumsily. She stopped at the gate, breathless, cheeks red from cold, eyes wide with uncertainty. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Anna looked nothing like the women in the advertisements Daniel had seen. No fine dresses, no confident smiles. She looked tired. She looked poor. And yet, there was something steady in her gaze, something that didn't beg or apologize for her appearance. "You're Daniel Harper?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. He nodded, suddenly aware of how large and rough he must seem to her. "You must be Anna. You should have waited at the station. I would have come." She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "I didn't want to be a burden." It wasn't far. Daniel swallowed. The snow continued to fall between them, filling the silence. Then Noah burst out of the house, bundled up like a small bear. "Papa, is that her?" he asked, eyes bright with curiosity. Anna's face changed instantly. The tiredness softened, replaced by something warmer. She crouched despite the snow soaking her skirts and smiled at him. "Hello," she said gently. "You must be Noah." He nodded, staring at her rags, then at her face. "You're cold," he said matter-of-factly. "You can have my scarf." Before Daniel could stop him, Noah pulled off his own thick scarf and held it out. Anna's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting it as if it were something precious. Something in Daniel's chest shifted. Inside the farmhouse, the warmth hit Anna like a wave. The house wasn't fancy, simple wooden furniture, patched rugs, the faint smell of soup. But to her, it felt like a sanctuary. Daniel hung her coat by the stove and noticed how thin it really was. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Dinner was awkward but quiet in a comfortable way. Noah chatted about school, about how Santa might find their house even though it was far from town. Anna listened intently, laughing softly at the right moments. She helped clear the table without being asked, her movements efficient, practiced. After Noah was sent to bed, Daniel poured 2 cups of tea. They sat across from each other at the table, the lamp casting a soft glow. "I won't pretend this isn't strange," Daniel said finally. "We barely know each other. If you change your mind—" "I won't," Anna interrupted, then flushed. "I mean, I've come a long way. I know what this is. I'm not afraid of work. Or of learning. He studied her face. There was no deception there. Just resolve. You arrived with almost nothing, he said carefully. She looked down at her hands. I sold what little I had to pay for the journey. Clothes can be mended. A home, that's harder to find. Daniel leaned back, the chair creaking. He thought of all the times he'd been judged by appearances, of the pitying looks after his wife died, of the assumptions people made about a widower with a child. He thought of Noah's immediate kindness, of Anna's acceptance of it. You're welcome here, he said simply. However long you choose to stay. Christmas morning came quietly. There were no lavish gifts, only a wooden toy Daniel had carved for Noah and a small bundle Anna had carefully wrapped in cloth. Inside were hand-sewn mittens for both of them, made from scraps of fabric she'd carried with her. I didn't know what else to give, she said apologetically. Daniel pulled them on, the stitches uneven but strong. These are perfect. Days turned into weeks. Anna proved herself not through grand gestures, but through consistency. She rose early, learned the rhythms of the farm, cooked meals that stretched limited supplies into something comforting. She listened more than she spoke. When Noah had nightmares, she sat by his bed and hummed softly until he slept again. People in town noticed. Some whispered about the poor woman Daniel had brought home. Others pitied her. Anna heard it all and said nothing. Instead, she showed up at church in her mended dress, head held high. She volunteered where help was needed. Slowly, the whispers changed tone. Daniel watched her from a distance, something unfamiliar growing in his chest. Gratitude at first, then respect, and eventually, something deeper that scared him more than loneliness ever had. One evening, as they stood side by side folding laundry, Daniel finally spoke the question that had been sitting between them. Are you happy here? Anna paused, then nodded. Yes, I've never had much, but I've always worked. Here, I feel useful and safe. He hesitated. I don't want this to be charity or obligation. She met his gaze. It isn't. You didn't choose me because of what I wore. You chose me because you needed someone. I needed someone too. Spring came slowly, melting the snow and revealing the land beneath. With it came renewal. Daniel invested in repairs, encouraged by Anna's careful management of what little they had. The farm began to thrive again. Noah laughed more. The house felt alive. The wedding, when it happened, was simple. No white gown, no grand celebration. Anna wore a plain dress she'd sewn herself. Daniel wore his best shirt. Noah stood between them, beaming. As Daniel took Anna's hands, rough and warm, he understood something clearly for the first time. Worth wasn't something you could see at a train station. It wasn't measured in silk or gold. It was in quiet strength, in kindness offered without expectation, in the courage to arrive in rags on Christmas Eve and still believe in love. He chose her not out of necessity, but out of recognition. And in doing so, he found that he had been chosen too.